it's a relatively intimate crowd, so hopefully we can get into some a level of Q&A and discussion afterwards where maybe we can really start to address some of the challenges that you're facing or help find some pathways forward for you. So let's dive in. So if you're not familiar with the environmental finance, well, let me back up. I forgot I added this slide this morning. So our agenda, what we'll be talking about today, we'll talk a little bit about what the Environmental Finance Center Network is. We'll talk about what my center here at the University of Maryland does. We'll talk about some of the grant programs that are available for environmental justice work. We'll talk a little bit about how you can get more information about those grants. And then we'll talk about restoring fish and wildlife habitats. So if you're in the Delaware River watershed and your priorities are, can link back to fish and wildlife habitat, that might be a program worth looking at. They open that program up a couple times a year. And then the 5-Star Urban Waters Restoration Program is really looking to build partnerships in urban areas to improve water quality and water quantity management and access to water resources. And then HUD, the Housing and Urban Development at the federal level, has community development block grants that flow down to the states. These are really focused on housing, uplifting communities with affordable housing, with improved quality of life, expanded economic opportunities, with a real focus on low and moderate income communities. And this is construction money or community improvement money for things like public facilities, for water utilities, streets, community centers, energy conservation, renewable energy, anything that is going to improve quality of life on low and moderate income communities. And they have a whole family of grants under the HUD umbrella, a bunch of which just came out today. And we'll have to check in on the details on that, but a bunch of which came out today. Different types of grant programs with different types and loan opportunities with different types of agendas. And so those are also ones that are really good to take a look at if you are looking to fund something tied to housing and community uplift in your community. And then most states have a grants office that is monitoring all of these different federal and state opportunities. And so it's really, there's another round of listservs that are really valuable to take a look at. These are some of the ones that are in the Mid-Atlantic, but most states across the country have some sort of grants office that is monitoring these things. In the state of Maryland, they actually not only monitor the different programs, but communities can go to the website and can put in the details about the types of projects that they're trying to fund. And the state will actually do a little bit of matchmaking on the back end and help. Okay, you said you wanted to improve this street and this streetscape, and here's a grant program that's appropriate for that. And then you said you wanted to improve your water infrastructure. Here's a grant program or a technical assistance program that would be good for that. And so the state actually does, if you can be patient while they do their due diligence in identifying the programs for you, then the state actually in Maryland will do some of that matchmaking, which is incredibly helpful. I think one of the biggest challenges for communities and community-based organizations pursuing grant funding, I mean, even before you get to the point of having to write a proposal, is just like, where do I look and how do I piece these things together in a way that makes sense? And, am I eligible? Is this part of, which part of my potential project is this relevant for? And how do I piece all these things together? That's a lot of the work that we do. And so, in addition to helping communities identify pots of money, a lot of what we do is direct technical assistance with communities or collections of communities and their stakeholders. And that takes a number of different forms. We do a lot of capacity building and training, local leadership trainings, online trainings, the Municipal Online Stormwater Training Center, which I'll talk about in a little bit. We're often asked to do some policy analysis or some financing assessment. For example, if the state of Maryland were going to pursue a particular piece of legislation, they might come to us and say, what are the potential fiscal impacts of that? We have worked with different state agency programs, with different local government programs, and with land trusts and other kinds of community organizations to look at what they're trying to pay for and help them assess, like, how are we doing? Is this a good approach? Are we allocating enough dollars to this? Are there ways we could get more efficient with how we're allocating dollars? So doing that kind of financial assessment, looking at their budgets and analyzing them, looking at their programs and figuring out if there are ways that their programs can operate more efficiently. And then we do, it goes hand in hand with finance, because folks are not going to be willing to invest in something they don't understand the value of. We do a lot of community outreach and engagement and facilitation. And that's that's twofold. That the purpose of that is twofold. It's not only being able to push information out to help a community understand what they're grappling with, or for a local government to help their community members understand the value of investing in stormwater management, for example, or pollinator gardens. It's not just that pushing information out, it's also making sure that we're listening to what the community is identifying as challenges, what the community is identifying as the solutions they want to see in their community. And so it's very much a two-way conversation. And that looks a little different depending on the project and depending on what the community is trying to accomplish. Sometimes it's an outreach campaign, sometimes it's focus groups and really intense conversations, and dialogue. And then sometimes it's broader surveys and interviews. It really is. And often it's a mix of those things. So some of the technical assistance programs that we currently have in place, we'll start with water infrastructure, the Water Infrastructure Environmental Finance Center. So our center has been around on this campus for 30 years now. I've been around for 20 of them, so I'm getting old here. But that has been, again, harkening back to that earlier slide, that has really been about providing that how to pay support to communities across any environmental media that they're challenged with. Energy, climate, resilience, sustainability, water, you name it, waste management. This past time around, every 6 years we recompete to retain our designation as an environmental finance center. And in this past time around, they linked that competition up to some bipartisan infrastructure law funding, and not only redesignated EFCs as the multi-environmental media, they also designated water infrastructure environmental finance centers. So now we are not only the Environmental Finance Center for the Mid-Atlantic, we are also the Water Infrastructure Environmental Finance Center for the Mid-Atlantic. So what does that mean? It means we are tasked with helping communities access the $50 billion that's coming through the bipartisan infrastructure law to the states through the state revolving loan funds, for addressing lead issues, for addressing PFAS issues, for addressing drinking water and clean water issues, helping communities access those dollars and deploy those dollars and manage those dollars, with a particular focus on making sure that we're getting those dollars into the hands of the communities who have not traditionally been able to access those dollars. We'll be looking at not only how to access those state revolving loan fund dollars, but also how do we leverage across all of the different pots of money that are coming at the state and the federal level. So helping communities weave together different pots of money for different purposes. But again, really making sure that those dollars are getting to the folks who have not traditionally had access and not and who obviously need it the most. And again, it's not just about accessing those dollars, but then, okay, great, I've got these dollars, now what do I do? So a lot of that is about building the capacity of the community to be able to manage those dollars and doing it in a way so that capacity stays put in the community, and so that when our engagement has to end, they're not right back at the square one and having to start all over again. So in pursuing that, we built what we think was a pretty impressive team. Our center is leading that charge, but the Center for Community Engagement, Environmental Justice, and Health, our wonderful hosts here today, we have been arm in arm in terms of partnering on this, and we have a number of other partners as well. We do a lot of finance and community engagement. Obviously, Center for Community Engagement, Environmental Justice, and Health is also deep roots in the communities that we are trying to make sure that this money gets to. So, recognizing that EFC is not necessarily the trusted voice in all of these communities, that's where Dr. Wilson's group, really has deep roots and is a trusted voice. And so that's something where we can partner and make sure that we're really reaching those communities. And then, because of the nature of the water infrastructure projects that a lot of the communities are wanting to put on the ground and the limited capacity that they have, we knew we had to bring in some folks who had a more technical and more engineering expertise. And so we have folks like Moonshot Missions, which is a nonprofit organization of folks who have spent their careers in utilities, drinking water, wastewater, stormwater utilities. who can go into a community and look at a particular water system and help assess what the needs are. So they've got that great technical skill set. We're working with the firm Quantified Ventures, who has done some really creative financing programs. So they are going to be really important for helping us help communities leverage the funds that are available with other types of financing mechanisms. They also have a whole team of folks who were formerly directors of state revolving fund loan programs, and so they know how to navigate those application processes inside and out. And so they're going to be a really valuable partner. And then coming back around to this idea of trusted voices. We have several rural capacity development groups that are serving. That there's 3 of them that serve this region under a national umbrella. So Southeast Rural Community Assistance Program, RCAP Solutions Northeast, and the West Virginia Community Action Partnership. These are folks who for decades have been working on the ground in small communities. These are communities where the drinking water system serves less than 10,000 people. The wastewater system serves less than 10,000 people. In a lot of cases, they're serving like 70 people or a couple hundred people. So these are folks who have longstanding relationships with those communities and are going to be a really important conduit for us to be able to get dollars on the ground. But they also have a technical skill set, again, similar to Moonshot, and being able to go into those small, rural, remote communities and help them assess what their needs are and provide technical expertise. And then finally, our partners at the Water Center at University of Penn are going to be really valuable in terms of policy analysis. So these are folks who are going to be able to say, they're going to be able to see what we're doing, how things are playing out on the ground, and then they're going to be able to say, here are the policy recommendations that we need to push back up to the states about their programs and push back up to the feds about their programs. So that's really the role that they'll be playing. And so, at the end of the day, this is about direct technical assistance to municipalities and utilities and tribes in the Mid-Atlantic. And it's really start to finish at any point in their process that, we need to be ready and able to plug in. So that could be talking to them about identifying what their problems are. That could be working with them to understand what kind of solutions they would like to see to their water infrastructure challenges. Building their technical capacity, their management capacity, their financial capacity, helping them develop projects, again, in partnership with some of our more technical partners, and then developing funding requests, whether that be for grant programs or for the State Revolving Loan Fund or some of the Inflation Reduction Act programs, helping them develop their funding requests. And in a lot of cases, it starts with community engagement and partnership building because, we're talking about climate. This is an all hands on deck sort of situation, right? So we're often helping the communities build up that team of folks that not only builds their own capacity to do things, but again, is addressing the multifaceted beast that we're dealing with climate. And again, targeting those environmental justice communities, because at the end of the day, everyone deserves to have access to safe, reliable water systems. So our approach to the technical assistance really, and I think this echoes some of the themes that we've been hearing this week from some of the other panels and some of the other speakers. We really want to start with meeting communities where they are. We want to make sure, as I said before, that we're leveraging those existing trusted voices. And we want to make sure that we are listening foremost. We don't want to be going into a community and presuming that we know what their problems are and that we know what the solutions should be. We really need to be understanding what they are grappling with. And it may not be, water infrastructure may not be in their top 3 challenges, right? It might be workforce development, or it might be, having good jobs or a better economy. And so under this particular umbrella, it's our job to figure out how to tie the water infrastructure challenges back to the things that are priorities for that community. And again, making sure that as we're developing pathways forward for the community, that we are doing that in partnership with them and making sure that it is a reflection of their priorities, the priorities of their people, not the priorities of the technical assistance providers, not the priorities of just the elected officials. We want to make sure that we are that the solutions that we suggest are the priorities of the people. And again, as I said earlier, this really is sort of a soup to nuts situation. This starts with everything from planning and assessment, some of those community engagement, asset management concepts that are really like a step zero in even beginning to flesh out what a project looks like, developing some of those project ideas, project design, connecting them to the resources that will help with getting engineering reports done, with environmental reviews done, supporting that community engagement that builds out a team that has all of the skill sets needed to be able to get this project to pursue the funding, get the projects on the ground, and then maintain those projects once those projects are on the ground. And we need to think about that in the funding strategy as well. If these projects go into the ground, particularly around water infrastructure, and they're not being maintained, then it's almost like a wasted investment because they're not going to continue to perform as needed. So thinking about what kind of partnerships might be necessary for ongoing operations and maintenance of these water infrastructure projects. Identifying the funding programs, doing some financial analysis, figuring out if their rates are appropriate and going to be sufficient to cover what needs to be done. Again, application support for different grant programs or for the revolving loan fund program. And then again, some of our more technical partners will help with those program management pieces, that folks who have been in those positions before and know those systems and those programs inside and out. And we recognize that this isn't necessarily going to be a linear progression. It depends on where a community is, which types of help they'll want or need. Some communities, this is a 5-year award. We're going to be working with 40 to 60 communities a year. Some of those communities, it's going to be a real light touch technical assistance. They have a challenge, we can connect them to some resources or connect them to a partner, and we can facilitate that happening. And then, they have a certain amount of capacity of their own and they're on their way. Other communities, it's going to be a long and sustained engagement with those communities to really help lift them up to where they would like to be. That could be, a year, 2 years of engagement with it. So a much deeper dive, a much more intensive technical assistance experience. And so I think we all throw the phrase technical assistance around, and I think we all have an idea of what that is, but sometimes it's helpful to see what that actually looks like. So I thought I'd talk about a couple of communities where we are doing some of this water infrastructure technical assistance already. Anybody familiar with Eagle Harbor here in Prince George's County? So this is an African-American community in southern Prince George's County on the Patuxent River. Been around for over 100 years, very small community, less than 100 residents. And stop me if you've heard this one before. In the late 70s, early 80s, a power plant was sited in their community. And so it's been decades now of runoff from that site, and as operations have increased and the imperviousness of that site has increased, it's increased runoff from the site. And so the community is very concerned about contaminated water in their wells, their drinking water, and the increases in stormwater runoff is eroding their streams and eroding their shoreline and eroding their literally their yards. And so they have some real solid concerns about that. The good news is there's a lot of interest on the part of the state to try and help address this, the challenges in Eagle Harbor. The challenge of that is now you have a community of less than 100 people who's trying to figure out which agency am I supposed to talk to about which things, and who does what, and where do I. So one of the things that we've tried to step into to do, it started with engaging their elected officials to understand the problem, and engaging residents will come down further in the timeline. But we're trying to be the point person who's coordinating that state agency response so that the community has one person to talk to, and that's us. And we can take care of making sure all of those other state resources are delivered on the back end without the community having to juggle all of that. And then we're also, we hear their concerns about the wells. It seems pretty well founded. And, we're identifying an opportunity to get those wells tested, and then we'll be able to figure out, once we have some data, then we know what we're dealing with, and then we can figure out what potential solutions look like. We're also helping with we will be helping with community engagement. And again, talking about that two-way street, right? So we'll be helping them put information out about what the community is grappling with in terms of, or what they can expect in terms of their drinking water, but also empowering the community to be providing information on what they're observing and what's going on their parcel and what's going on in their well. So having that community science piece come in too. And then another set of communities we're working with, we're just getting started. Actually, the kickoff meeting is Monday. There's a collection of state and local partners in the Rappahannock River Basin of Virginia. So this is like the Fredericksburg area, if that helps narrow down geographically for anyone who's not familiar. And they're really concerned about septic failures in the context of they've got rising groundwater, they've got changing soils, and septics are failing, and they're really concerned about what does this water infrastructure challenge mean for human health, for ecological health. And then because they are located in the Chesapeake Bay watershed, they're also thinking, like, what is this doing in terms of nutrients leaching to the bay, and the expectations that we need to be reducing the amount of nitrogen and phosphorus and sediment that's going to the bay. And one of the very cool things is, again, driven by this rising groundwater and changing soils, they're thinking about this in the context of climate. They are not looking at this as just a water infrastructure issue. They're thinking about it in the context of climate. And that's great for a couple of reasons. I mean, obviously, if we're not thinking about all of our infrastructure needs in the context of climate, we are setting ourselves up for failure because we're not taking into consideration the future potential impacts of climate on the infrastructure. And that's something that we need to be doing. But from a financing perspective, it's also really great because it opens up a whole host of other types of funding programs that they can access to be able to and leverage across one another. And that's obviously, again, something that we'll be helping them with, figuring out how to leverage different pots of money for what they're trying to accomplish in terms of studying the existing septic failures and then figuring out what they want to do about it. So that's WaterTA in a nutshell, the Water Technical Assistance Program at the Environmental Finance Center. We also do some other water work specifically with small drinking water and wastewater systems. And that is, again, through some funding. We've been doing this for over a decade with some funding from EPA. We do it in partnership with a number of our other sister centers across the country. And, it's utilities. It's for small systems, small utilities, again, serving under 10,000 folks. And again, a lot of them are serving 20, 30, 70, 100 folks, really small systems. And that might be a traditional drinking water utility, a wastewater utility. It might be a septic fields, wells. Thinking about also how stormwater and green infrastructure play into some of the potential solutions to addressing their utility problems. And this support takes a really broad range of different types of things. So for really broad surface level, widespread, reach a whole lot of utilities in one shot, we frequently do trainings. They obviously, since COVID, they have more frequently been virtual, which is great because you can reach a lot of people. You don't have these small systems, like they maybe have a half-time guy who, can't take a day off to travel to the next, community for a training. So being able to do things virtually has been really helpful. You can hit a lot of folks. But the trainings are great, but you can hit a lot of folks at a surface level. And so we also are partnering that with technical assistance to be able to help do a deeper dive with these utilities, to be able to sit down in the utility and talk about what are you grappling with, how can we help, and making sure that we are also building peer networks from the communities that we're working with. So when we've worked with a handful of communities, we'll do something that brings them together, whether that's virtual or in person, so that at the point where EFC leaves the table, then we're not leaving them high and dry. They now have this network of peers they can say, hey, I'm grappling with this. What did you guys do when you had that problem? So this is the topic span all sorts of things, but it's a lot of things like asset management. Are you planning, and do you know all the parts of your system? Do you know how old they are? Do you know when they're projected to need to be replaced? How are they being maintained? So the asset management piece being, how can we do things more efficiently? Are you experiencing a lot of water loss? How can we make sure that you are not sending water loss straight back to your wastewater plant and having to invest in wastewater treatment for water that just leaked out of your drinking water system and isn't even, it wasn't even used properly. So thinking about those asset management components, and are there opportunities for, there's a ton of money out there for energy efficiency. How do we connect you to some things that will make your plant run more efficiently, and therefore you can stretch your dollars farther? Workforce development, cybersecurity. Are your rates appropriate? Are they going to be sufficient to keep your system running? Are your rates affordable? Are there parts of your community that we need to be thinking about how to make sure that they still have access, that the rates aren't going to be a barrier to accessing clean and safe drinking water? So those are some of the things. And then again, of course, our attempt is to root all of this in climate, and thinking about how climate is going to impact any of the decisions that the communities are facing. Another one of our resources is the Municipal Online Stormwater Training Center. So this is, as it sounds like, online, and it's intended to accelerate innovative, cost-effective, and sustainable solutions to stormwater management challenges. And so they have they're on-demand, self-paced courses. Everything from urban forestry to pet waste to native landscaping to putting infrastructure in the ground, working green infrastructure into your stormwater planning, what stormwater finance looks like. So all of these different types of courses, but also in addition to the courses, there is an interactive case story map of communities throughout the Mid-Atlantic that we've worked with, so that if a community is interested to see what one of their neighbors or some other community has done, they can search and say, here's the problem I'm dealing with, here's the budget I'd like to stay within. And they can do that search and identify stories from other communities, because we have found, and you guys are probably just as aware of this as we are, like, folks like to hear from their peers. They don't necessarily want the university to come in and tell them stuff. They're like, great, I'm sure you're right. But when they're fellow utility operator from the next community, or the planner from the next community, that really carries weight. Those conversations, those peer-to-peer exchanges really carry weight. And so we think that's another valuable piece of the Municipal Online Training Center. There's some of the case stories were developed into videos. So if you don't have time to dig through the interactive map, you have 5 minutes, you can watch a quick video and learn about how another community maybe dealt with an issue similar to what you're trying to deal with the idea being like, let's promote these good practices, let's promote these success stories, and let's encourage the replication of things that have worked for other communities. And then there's also a resource center. So that's a searchable database with resources for planning, for implementing projects, for how to finance projects, for how to address operations and maintenance, all of those things for your stormwater and your green infrastructure practices. And then finally, a technical assistance program that we're operating with some funding from the Energy Foundation from their Maryland state chapter is, again, looking at all of this infrastructure bill and all of the Inflation Reduction Act funding that is coming for energy purposes, for climate and energy. And so really trying to make sure that we're facilitating access to those federal and state dollars, again, particularly for the communities who have not traditionally been able to access them. And that it's similar to our small systems, our small water systems training. It sort of spans the reach a lot of people at a surface level and reach a handful of people at a really deep dive. So there'll be a webinar series about the different programs and how to access those programs. There'll be an in-person leadership training, again, not only to share information out, but also to develop that peer-to-peer exchange among folks. Fact sheets for communities that just want to take a look at something and understand something better and don't necessarily need a deep dive or any linking arms and partnership. And then, some guidance documents about how to make sure that the programs that communities are designing or are equitable and engaging the community voice in program design. And then finally, we will work with about half a dozen communities in the state to support them with direct technical assistance for pursuing those dollars. Identifying communities that are most in need, not only of those dollars, but in support in accessing and deploying those dollars. And then the other goal for the energy justice work is to, again, that peer-to-peer piece, right? Increasing the connectivity and the information sharing between local governments. So making sure that there are peer-to-peer, that we're providing platforms for peer-to-peer exchange. And then that we, again, similar to what we talked about with the Municipal Online Stormwater Training Center, developing those community spotlights or those case studies that promote the good work that's happening on the ground, but also encourage the replication of those good practices. And that is what I have for you all this morning. I'm happy to, we're an intimate crowd. I'm happy to take questions or hear about some of the things that you're grappling with that we might be able to help.
Could I just say this is, the more I learn about the Environmental Finance Center, the more I am overwhelmed by all that you do. This was a very thorough and complete presentation. I just have two questions.
Hopefully overwhelmed in a good way, Paul, and not exasperated.
I just have two questions.
Yes.
People are asking about the cost of technical assistance.
Yes.
And also, I forgot what the second one is, but why don't you start there? This is the microphone. Please, if you have a question, raise your hand and I'll bring it to you.
So to answer your first question about the cost, any of the programs that I just described are currently funded programs, so there is no cost to the community.
Hi,
Hi.
Leanne Nurse from the Nature Conservancy. I worked in Region 3 originally and then retired after about 31 years. I am wondering in terms of the direct outreach and support for communities. So we have people in the 50 states who are working also with smaller NGOs. And have you had, what kind of experience have you had working with big greens in small communities?
Big greens in small communities. We've been working with Nature Conservancy in Crisfield, Maryland, on a NOAA, a National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration project. That's the most recent one. That's actually ongoing and is going to continue with some additional funding from the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation. I think that our center, not that the big greens don't have this capacity, but I think our center often can be a good facilitator of those relationships. When we sit down with the community and we know we're not the sole solution for a community. What they're grappling with is going to need, it's going to take a village, as Paul and I like to say when we talk about grants. It's going to take a village, and if a big green is an appropriate partner, then we tap them in. And I think sometimes the communities, especially some of the really smaller and more rural, remote communities, can see the big greens as overwhelming. And so I think we can help navigate that for them, and maybe take some of that anxiety about how am I going to figure out how to get to the right person and get what I need. I think that's something where we can help. It's a great question. Thank you.
I'll bring it over.
Hi, thank you so much for the presentation. I think I agree with Paul. There's just so much you all do. So great to learn about everything. I have two questions. I think one, what are some barriers that you see or come across when communities are trying to access funds? And then number two, do you see philanthropy also playing a role in adding capacity to these projects?
Absolutely. Those are excellent questions. And I at some point I was supposed to say this and I forgot it in my notes, but I think one of the biggest barriers to accessing the dollars is because money isn't the only limiting factor for communities. There's a capacity challenge, especially for the smaller communities and the communities that these dollars are being aimed at, the environmental justice communities who need these dollars the most, who need the benefits of the projects that could go on the ground the most, who have been suffering for the longest. They're not necessarily the ones that have the capacity to sit down and write a grant proposal before you can even write the proposal. Like, are you federally registered? Do you have do you have a SAM number? Do you have if you're, depending on what dollars you're pursuing, do you have 501c3 status? Dollars aren't the only limiting factor. And I think while as amazing as it is that all of this money is finally coming to, be invested in communities, and I love that we're targeting the right communities, we have to be thinking about, like, a lot of these dollars are flowing through the state revolving loan funds. Who among these communities has a payback, like a payback source because these are loan funds. These are not grants. How are they going to be able to pay that back over time? So, having the funding is not the only limiting factor. I think that's making sure that we're building that capacity to be able to act and doing so responsibly, right? Like, don't just help them get the money in the door and then they're like, now what? Like, making sure that there's a roadmap forward and that they have the capacity they need, whether that's, helping build their skill sets or whether that's helping them find the partners that can help with implementing and with maintaining those projects. And your second question was about philanthropy. Yeah, that is an excellent question, because we are seeing, to be able to access, there's a lot of step zeros before you can access these dollars, and there's not necessarily a pot of money that supports that. And I think that's a really important place for philanthropy to step in to help with that those initial steps that no one is funding. So I think that's one of the places where we really see an opportunity for philanthropy. Then there's also some other things that the dollars that are coming just don't cover, in terms of, like, maybe you get the funding, but you need to be able to maintain those projects over time. So what is that going to look like? Are there philanthropic opportunities there? I think philanthropy can help fill some gaps, and I think philanthropy can help with those really early step zero challenges to even become eligible for the funding. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Molly Noor, and I work in transportation planning. So I'm interested in kind of the intersect. I had a few questions, so if there's others, please, I'm happy to stop. MATCH, the Mid-Atlantic Climate Action Hub.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I guess I never understood. How does that work vis-a-vis the EFC?
So we're a partner with Center for Community Engagement, Environmental Justice and Health, who's leading up that Robert Wood Johnson funded project for MATCH.
Okay, so that's an external foundation, and you guys are one piece of that. Is that it?
Yeah. So Robert Wood Johnson is funding that. It's essentially revolves around some community-based organizations who are hubs throughout the Mid-Atlantic. And this is about not only getting some funding to those hubs and helping to build their capacity, but then also there's a mini grant program that goes out to the competitive mini grant program that their constituencies can apply for, and it actually is going to be under review in the next couple of weeks, get announced next month. So we are a partner in delivering technical assistance and capacity building to those hubs and then to their constituencies through that 2-year award.
And how do you see yourself? How do you see this organization here, the EFC, vis-a-vis like private sector consulting firms that do similar work for government agencies?
Yeah, that's a great question. We're at a university, but we're sort of a nonprofit because we are 100% soft funded, and we sort of do consulting services. So it's kind of a weird hybrid. We operate very much like a consulting firm, but I think because we are able to pursue grants to support our time, we're often a less expensive option for, we're able to subsidize our work to a certain extent with governments. And so there are other governments, for example, Prince George's County chooses to directly contract with us we helped them develop their climate action plan, and now we're helping them implement their climate action plan, and we're running all of the community engagement piece for them, and we're doing that in a direct contract with them. So and so in some cases, we are partnering with those consulting firms and in working with local governments where perhaps they don't have either the roots, the existing roots on the ground in a particular community that we do, or we can bring the financing and funding and community engagement piece, which sometimes is lacking, and depending on the firm, sometimes lacking.
And the URL for the website that you showed, is that available? And is that just available to like nonprofits and state aid and government agencies, or is that available to the general public?
The Most Center, is that what you were?
Yeah.
So it's mostcenter.org.
Okay.
And that is open to the general public. Unfortunately, when we had 5 years of philanthropic support for that, and when the philanthropic support ended and we had to transfer this to the university, we did have to start charging for the online courses. I think it's literally just what it costs us to have the university hosted. I think it's maybe $20 a course at most. But yeah, no, that's wide open to anybody.
Sorry, one more question.
Go.
So in transportation planning, the US DOT has come up with a lot, and the EPA have online tools to help address issues of environmental justice. And so, for example, for transportation, the Equitable Transportation Communities, I believe, tool is one of them.
Okay.
So are there tools that are available online to communities through you or through other agencies that you know of that can be leveraged by people who are, I think what we're seeing as we move forward that all these fields overlap in more meaningful ways. And so the more we can learn about the kind of, neighboring issues, the better, the more effective we can be in serving the communities.
Sure. We have not developed we have one tool that we have developed that looks at scenario comparisons for different types of green infrastructure practices. So you can literally go in, identify your geography, figure out what practices, look at different combinations of practices to see what kinds of different kinds of results you get in terms of water quantity, water quality, green infrastructure, ancillary benefits. That's probably the biggest tool that we have available, but our sister centers some of our sister centers, particularly the EFC that's at Chapel Hill, they have done a lot of spreadsheet-based tools that are on affordability and rate setting and rates management, really a lot around the water utility. And then our sister center at the University of New Mexico has done a lot around water infrastructure tools and around water infrastructure that would also be worth taking a look. And maybe I can get your card and I can help connect you with some of those. I can get you links and stuff to some of those things. Chapel Hill or University of New Mexico. Uh-huh. Yeah, both of those. Yep. And the first one I mentioned may have been the one that we developed. It's all good. Yeah, that tool is called Classic, CLASIC. It's it's one of those things where you back into an acronym to sound cute in your proposal, but but that was the stormwater one. Yes, sir.
I was informed that the session will go until 12 p.m.
Okay.
I think we have one more question.
Yeah, we have 7 minutes. Let's go.
Hi, my name is Heather Holton Van Tassel. I'm the executive director of Three Rivers Waterkeeper. We're based in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And I'm curious if you would be able to help find assistance for advocacy funds. It's been easier, not easy, but easier to get funds for, the science monitoring, the community engagement when it comes to education. But it kind of starts to fall short around advocacy. A lot of big funders just don't want to go there.
Yeah.
And we're like constantly piecemealing things. And in reality for us, because we focus a lot on the Clean Water Act, our issues is that our area, it does not enforce the Clean Water Act at all. And that requires advocacy funds. And I'm curious, because this is connected to federal funding, if that would be even possible for you to help us navigate that. Because big dollars is usually federal and they won't let you actually enforce the Clean Water Act. So
Yeah, so there's state and federal dollars forbid advocacy. So it really, that's another one what really falls to the philanthropic community. And I think I do agree that some of the bigger, we've seen the advocacy dollars flow more at the like smaller, more regional philanthropic organizations or maybe community-based foundations that have a stake in what's happening locally. I can understand what you're saying about some of the bigger philanthropic organizations are taking a step back from that as well as the state and the federal. But yeah, we could, let's line up, let's trade information and let's find a time to talk. I've got a couple of folks in our shop that have been doing some work in southwestern PA and one in particular who has roots in that area, like family roots in that area. So I'm sure we'd be eager to talk to you. Yep.
I think that's really an excellent question. And I know the concern about lobbying and
Yep.
SIEGE, the Center for Engagement, Environmental Justice and Health, has received a great deal of private money.
Yeah.
So from the Bezos Foundation, et cetera, et cetera. So that's a very important question I don't know if Casey Wetzel is here this afternoon from the Chesapeake Bay Trust.
I'm not sure.
But anyway, Casey is a
She's
wonderful resource. And if you can't get a hold of Dr. Wilson today, because he's sort of
He's in high demand.
at the end of his rope. But that's an excellent question. And we've often talked about the role of philanthropy in filling the gaps
Yeah.
of federal funding.
Yeah, I was also, this is kind of crossing over. Have you worked with Earth Justice or any of the legal / multi-political advocacy networks?
we do have partners with advocacy groups like Earth Justice, and we've worked with the National Environmental Law Center as well. It gets challenging because it's not your own funds, right? So it's constantly selling these individual things, and you don't really get the same advice as like having actual funds designated to do the work. So there are ways to get around it, and that's what we've been doing. But it would be easier if we had more designated funds and not asking constantly, because there's a lot of management that goes into that. That's, bigger. Like, so then we need more operating funds because we have a lot of admin on our side. So yes, and it's working, but it could be so much better.
Thank you. And I also know that part of the work plan of our community hub partners who are playing a part in the EPA TIC-TAC and match, one of their objectives, one of their long-term outcomes is leadership development so that they can advocate.
Yeah.
So that's really an excellent question. We have 2 minutes left. I just have one question for you, Jen.
Yes, sir.
Are you going to be available for people to talk to you this afternoon?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Great.
Yeah, if anyone wants to talk offline, either here today or, we can trade information and we can talk next week. Thank you all. I appreciate you.
No more questions? Okay. Thank you very much.
Thanks for mic running. I appreciate it, Paul. Yeah.
Go for it.